recording? There we go. Thank you all for joining us. This is a special meeting of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen for the City of Hendersonville. Tonight is November 30th, 2021. It's a few seconds after 5 o'clock. Even though it's a special meeting, we're going to begin as we typically do, and that's with a prayer and a pledge. So please join me in bowing your head. Dear Lord, thank you for bringing us together, and thank you for this opportunity to serve you, and thank you for this wonderful city, state, and country in which we live. And thank you for the many opportunities we have, not just to serve you here, but to serve you as we go from here. Please help us use those gifts, talents, abilities you've given us to do your work. And again, not just here, but help us to use the wisdom you've given us, especially to do your work again, not just here, but as we go from here. And please also, as we go from here, help us to express, as Alderman Hayes is very fond of saying, an attitude of gratitude. This is a season certainly for that, if not the season being every day. But also, in this part of that attitude of gratitude, we need to thank you for the life of Alderman Pat Campbell. And we also want to ask you to give peace to his family, his mother, Mary Jane, his wife, Lori, his children and grandchildren, Danielle, TJ, Jordan, Leah, Troy, Nicole, and Marianne, and his sisters, Cindy and Margie. And also, we need to remember to give thanks for the life of Alderman Earl Bass. He also recently passed away. We want to ask you to give peace to his wife, Molly, his daughter, Sybil, his son-in-law, Colby, his grandchildren, Grace, Sadie, and Cooper, and his sister, Lisa. And please, we want to ask you to provide continued recovery to Steve Luther and to Alderman Jonathan Hayes and to all those who suffer. And help us to remember that your son is the reason for this season. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Please join me for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. Annette, let me turn on all the microphones here and make sure we don't have too much feedback. Already we have some feedback. And I'm going to ask you to call the roll. I'll make sure everybody can be heard. Annette, go ahead, please.
Brown. Collins. Here. Cunningham. Here. Dixon. Here. Edwards.
Here.
Hayes.
Here.
Peterson.
Here.
Petrelli. Here. Robertson.
Here.
Skidmore.
Here.
Waters.
Here.
Clary.
Here. What do we got? So we have 11. So in that case, six will be a majority. And next on the we do not need to vote on the agenda. The agenda was because of the special meeting. The agenda was set when the notice went out. Citizen comments. We have Stephen Puckett, Sanders Ferry Road.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Clearly, we're here at a special call meeting to handle some items that are formalities, but the big ticket item, of course, is redistricting. The redistricting process that began with controversy is now hitting the end with controversy and, unfortunately, tragedy. When this process began, it was understood that the pandemic and the compressed timeline were going to impair the ability of the Citizens Committee to be able to fully do its job. And so we asked them to do what was really almost considered impossible. That task, unfortunately, yielded results that were incomplete. There were two maps that came out. One that took away representation with 4 wards, and one that significantly altered Ward 2, in which I reside, to the point that, quite honestly, the way it's drawn, you might as well just have the Chamber of Commerce appoint the members. The unfortunate tragedy of that is that the committee left out one last map, a critical map, and that was the minimum harm map. And as such, Alderman Campbell saw that. He took it upon himself to stand up for his community. And even in the last meeting, suggested that he was willing to sacrifice his own participation in his ward, if necessary, to preserve the integrity of his community. It's ironic that the suggestion that the lake somehow splits Ward 2, when the reality is it defines it. It makes our community, the Saunders Ferry community, and the Indian Lake side of Drake's Creek, the top two targets for economic development, and especially high-density development. To approve the map, which makes it unfortunate that I have to come up here as a citizen in defense of my own ward, in defense of my own community, not even my ward, from economic development that we've been under attack with, to call for us to adopt the map that was drawn by Alderman Campbell, because the Citizens Committee, because of the restrictions, because they were not able to reach out, and communities like mine were not able to come out. I'm risking shutting down a grocery store right now just to be here to defend my community. Which is unfortunate. And I pray it don't happen. You know, the thing, it's one of those rare cases where we stand together. Ward 2 has served as a linchpin for this city to hold us together when it comes to economic development, to make sure that we get the best deal for every ward. You adopt the map that you approved last time on first reading, you're going to pull that pin out and set off a war between the wards. Because why should we ever stand for you when economic development comes knocking on your door? When you're signing up our community up to be butchered in the name of economic development. Because this map will set up an 8-4 split. Because we all know the mayor's going to vote no. In fact, kind of waiting on him to pull a Satterfield. But the fact of the matter is,
Stephen, you got 30 seconds.
thank you. We've got to stand together. Because if you abandon us today, who's going to stand for you tomorrow? Thank you.
Stephen, thank you. We've got Jeff Sassy, Villaway.
Good afternoon. Thank you for holding this meeting. It's a sad day for the city of Hendersonville, and a tough day. Right around the holidays, and we lose one of our own who did. He believed in this community and is going to be dearly missed by a lot of people, myself included. We didn't always agree politically, but he was a great person and a great friend, so he will be missed. I came up here to comment on the redistricting today. There, I'm a little taller than that microphone allows. The Citizens Committee that was put together was made up of a very diverse group who were from all areas of our community and set out on one mission to make a fair map for our city, to make it fair for all citizens, and not to consider politics, not to consider where the aldermen were. And they did their job. They made a map that was concise, that minimized the length of each line. If you look at the current map that we have now, you have the two peninsulas split. And if you go from point to point on one side of the peninsula to the other, in heavy traffic, it's going to take you 30, 35 minutes. And that's just not right. I mean, you're separating communities through the old map, the map that we currently hold in place. With the new map, the lines are shorter, the communities are held together, the peninsulas are contained, and it just makes sense. I think it's going to make our community stronger. It's going to, the representation is going to be much easier for the aldermen in those areas as well, because it is more concise. And I urge you to approve the map on second reading. Thank you.
Jeff, thank you. Paul Guthrie, East Harbor.
My promise, Ms. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Guthrie.
Good morning, Lady in the Rose Farm.
Jeff Blazak, Macy Drive.
Good evening. First and foremost, condolences to all of you that knew Pat outside of these walls. I never got to shake his hand, but we did communicate a few times, and I will say that Pat was always very responsive. And my friend over to the right of me has known Pat his whole life. I trust his judgment that he was a good man. I know that he's done a lot for the city, so for that, I'm sorry for all of your losses. Secondly, happy holidays to all of you guys. I know this is the year that, or the time of year that everybody's getting a little bit busy, but I appreciate everybody being here today to talk about this. Because I know it's important to some people, I own my own home in Hendersonville. I've lived here for 8 years. Before Hendersonville, I've owned 3 homes in 3 different states. All these states had different things to offer, and I've loved living in all of them, but Hendersonville has now become home. My children have been raised here. I've lived here longer than I've lived anywhere in this country. So for that, Hendersonville is home. That being said, one of the things that confused me when I moved here was wards and aldermen. Nowhere I lived before this had wards or aldermen. We had councils. And when I moved here and I told people where I was living, I never addressed anything with Ward 5, Hendersonville, Tennessee. It was Hendersonville. I don't come to these meetings, but I watch every single one of them. And most of you know that I have communicated with you all via email at some point or another. I do follow local politics. I follow it very seriously. I think it's important. What I don't like is the animosity and the disdain that this board brings to our community. There is fighting every single time there's a meeting here. It's disgusting. I've shown my kids videos of how you all act and told them, don't act this way. This proposal today is no different. I hear my all the time. My ward, my this. It's not your wards. It's ours. We elected you to represent us. So when you say my, that means that you have an interest in this that is beyond the citizens of this city. That scares me. There shouldn't be a label or a name on a proposal because it's not about one person, one ward, one district, whatever you want to call it. It's Hendersonville, Tennessee. That's what this is about. What's best for our city, not our wards. Somebody on one of your Facebooks put the proposal or put the suggestion in to eliminate wards. I couldn't be more in favor of that. I want to have a say in who represents me and my city, not my ward. I don't look at myself as a Ward 5 citizen. I look at myself as a citizen of Hendersonville, Tennessee. And if y'all up there, our elected officials, can't agree on what's best for Hendersonville, step down now. It's not about your ward. It's about our city. Not my city, our city. If you don't like it, leave. There are other people that will take your job, that will happily do it and represent us, the citizens of Hendersonville. I've seen dramatic change in this town since I moved here. Some good, some bad. I went from 13 minutes to get to my kids swimming at Sea Star to now about 30 minutes. It's good for the city, it's bad for commutes. But one thing hasn't changed, and that's the animosity that's up here on this dais every single 2 weeks that you guys are up here. Makes me sad. because we all should have the same interest at heart, and that's what's best for Hendersonville. So regardless of what you vote on this, and I'm not going to say which way I'm going to vote or I want you to vote, do what's best for Hendersonville, not your ward, not your specific district, not what's going to make you have to drive a little bit further, but what's best for Hendersonville, Tennessee.
Jeff,
Because
30
ultimately,
30 seconds.
that's it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Jeff.
Happy holidays.
Thank you, Jeff. Next, we have ordinance and resolutions. The first one is second reading of ordinance 2021-50. This is an ordinance appropriating coronavirus fiscal recovery funds to pay premium pay to public safety employees. Alderman Robertson. We have a motion. And a second from Alderman Hayes. Alderman Robertson, if you would like to, go ahead.
Thank you. I need to make sure that the staff comments and the staff exhibits are made part of the record on this ordinance for the proper filing for reimbursement under the federal funds that we are receiving. And I would also request, Mayor, that the city attorney deal with the pagination of the final ordinance with the proper attachments in working with staff. So,
Without objection, we'll take care of that.
thank you.
Okay, anything else, Alderman Robertson?
No, I appreciate everybody's support. We started down this road back, I think, in May on our first workshop. I put everyone on notice that it looked like that giving premium pay to our first responders was going to be reimbursable from the federal monies that we received. In fact, I've used the analogy, it's a slam dunk. That's one of the first things that they said was allowable. This will not have any budget impact. And the reason, Mayor, I requested this to be on tonight was so that our police and fire would be able to receive the bonus before the end of the year, by Christmas. And I've been told by staff that if we approve this tonight, that that will be done. So with that, I appreciate everyone's support for this important thank you to our public safety employees. Thank you.
Alderman Robertson, our city attorney wants to comment a little bit on that.
Yeah, is that a motion? I think you probably need to do a motion to add those staff comments to
Yes.
the ordinance. So
Yes.
I was just asking if that's a motion to amend.
Yes, and
Okay, so we've got a motion to amend from Alderman Robertson and second from Alderman Hayes. And this is to add the staff comments as well as, once we do that, to have the city attorney to change the pagination.
correct, and the exhibits as well, and the staff knows what needs to be included so that it can pass muster.
Okay. Any discussion on that item? I know Alderman Cunningham has her light on. Is it for this amendment? Is it for something on the main motion? Okay. Why don't we just go ahead and take a voice vote? All in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. That passes unanimously. Alderman Robertson, anything else?
No, sir, that's all.
Thank you. Alderman Cunningham.
Thank you, Mayor. I know at our last meeting, there was Alderman Campbell had brought up the fact that why can't we include all of the employees in this? And is that going to be a separate ordinance at a later time for the rest of the employees to be included? And then we would also be eligible to get those funds from the COVID funds. Is that correct?
Go ahead.
Yes, Alderman Cunningham. I think it would be appropriate because in my reading, and I'm no expert, but I have spent quite a bit of time reading the requirements for these funds. To me, public safety is a slam dunk. But for other employees, especially those employees that may have been working from home, it's more like a three-point shot. It's less likely to make. So I would think that would be more appropriate, maybe from the chairman of the finance committee, an ordinance dealing with that at a later time, because it very likely will not, in my opinion, will not be covered by the federal monies, and that will require a budget consideration.
All right. I'll go over that with our finance director, but we do have other frontline employees, such as our Public Works Department, our Parks Department, and others that were not working from home, but were able to, you know, come face to face with other people in the community. So I will discuss that with Robert at a later time. I wish we could add it to this, but I understand the particulars about why we can't do that this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Cunningham. Y'all, we're going to vote electronically on this one. David, Tina, are y'all ready for that? I see nobody else wishing to participate in discussion. So we're back to voting on the main motion. Keep in mind that we did have one amendment that was, I guess, somewhat administrative. Not quite yet. David and Tina, I'll do my best to give you a warning a little bit further ahead of time. Let's do this. We'll let them get ready for the next couple items, and we'll go ahead and do a voice vote. So, Annette, if you'll call the roll. All those in favor of second and final reading of ordinance 2021-50 as amended, please signify by saying aye when Annette calls your name. Those opposed, please say no.
Brown. Collins. Cunningham. Dixon. Edwards. Hayes. Peterson. Petrelli. Robertson. Skidmore. Waters. Claire.
Aye. It passed unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Annette. Next, we have second and final reading of ordinance 2021-48. This is an ordinance establishing ward boundaries for the city of Hendersonville based on the 2020 census. I so moved. Second from Alderman Waters. I want to go ahead and
This is something I don't know the answer to. This wasn't addressed in the redistricting committee or in the general committee, but what will happen, what are the options for what will happen with Mr. Peterson's seat? And I would like to address that, as well as hear what Alderman Peterson, his preference would be, what he wants to do, before we entertain any motions to amend to adopt any other ward boundaries.
so we don't actually have to make a decision on that, but there's really only one slight difference that happens in this situation, and that is that between 2022 and 2024, we will have a Ward 2 alderman that doesn't live inside Ward 2. And that's the only situation we'll have. There are many things that will stay the same. We will still have every alderman serving until including Alderman Peterson, serving until their 4-year term is up. We will still have an election in every ward in 2022. We'll have an election every ward in 2024. When you run for alderman, to get on the ballot, you have to live in the ward. So he won't be able to run in Ward 2 unless he moves. You have to live in the ward. That still stays the same. All terms will be for 4 years. Nobody's term is cut short by redistricting, and we will continue to have 12 aldermen. The only difference is that we were going to have a situation where from 2022 to 2024, that one of the aldermen from Ward 2 doesn't live in Ward 2. That's the only impact.
Okay, so is this automatic, or is this something that we would have to vote on? Is that?
We probably should vote on it after we pass this, and that's something that our city attorney and I talked about a little while ago. That we don't have to make this decision now. We can make this decision later. But it's and we've talked over a couple days. That really that's the only change, that we'll have an alderman that doesn't live in the district he'll represent for 2 years.
Okay, so more likely than not, Alderman Peterson would be, if this passes, Peterson would be living in Ward 4, but represent Ward 2 from 2022 to 2024?
That's exactly it.
Okay.
Any
All
others?
right, thank you. That's all I have for this.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Alderman Edwards. Alderman Cunningham.
Yeah, what about Alderman Campbell's seat? When we go to fill that seat, well, where does that person have to live?
Since the ward boundaries, and again, this is something I talked with the city attorney over, since the ward boundaries don't actually take effect until the election of 2022,
Yeah.
the person who fills Alderman Campbell's seat needs to live in the current Ward 2.
Okay. So, if that person lives in Ward 2 but is redistrict, because of this, to either Ward 4 or Ward 1,
Yeah.
then that term, well, I mean, that would expire anyway until the next election.
Right.
Okay,
His seat only goes to 2022.
right, gotcha,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Cunningham. Alderman Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. Not going to speak a lot on this. Spoke on it 2 weeks ago, spoke on it in general committee, and I think I know, or everyone here knows where I stand in it. I don't favor the committee's recommendation. I do favor what we compiled in general committee. So, but I have a constituent, and I've had several constituents out of all wards that have either emailed, some that have my number have texted, and a couple have called. I had one specifically that sent a letter. I think most of you probably got it. Asked me as his alderman if I would read that to the board tonight in the audience, and I told him that I would, so I'm going to fulfill that promise. My voice doesn't give out. It says, Dear Mayor and Aldermen and Alderwomen, I'm a Hendersonville resident, and I take issues of voting or representative democracy very seriously. I've emailed all of you previously on the issue of the redistricting maps, and I wanted to be here to speak in person, but was unable to. Therefore, I've asked the statement be read on my behalf. I urge you to vote for the General Committee's map, not the Redistricting Committee map. While I appreciate the work of the Redistricting Committee, I disagree with the unfortunate practical result of its map that will see far more residents being represented by people they do not vote for in the intervening years before the next set of elections. Democracy means being able to elect our leaders. As citizens, democracy demands that we select our leaders and that the leaders we select to represent us continue to do so until we vote someone else to take their place, not by politicians redrawing a line. Redistricting should be accomplished in a way that minimizes this effect as much as possible so that it is the citizens' vote that changes their representatives. The General Committee map more accurately balances that essential ideal of democracy with the need of redistricting for the future. On this issue, I understand that the Redistricting Committee was told not to consider where current aldermen live in drawing the new lines. With the suggestion that the State Comptroller's Office does not direct that this be considered. Respectfully, I do not believe that is accurate. On the contrary, I believe this directive and resulting redistricting committee process fails to fully implement the Comptroller's direction to consider and document traditional districting principles as part of the redistricting process. I quote the following from page 10 of the May 2021 version of the State Comptroller's Office publication, A Guide to Local Government Redistricting Tennessee. The body should apply and document the use of traditional districting principles throughout the redistricting process. As stated in the Shaw case, the body should take into consideration compactness, continuity, respect for the political subdivisions, and respect for communities of interest, and protection of incumbents. Protection of incumbents was a traditional principle the State Comptroller directed the committee to consider, but it was not. Importantly, consideration of the impact on the incumbents is not for the benefit of the politicians themselves. It is to help protect the power of the people to have their voices heard through those that they chose to have represent them and to avoid those voices being extinguished through the redrawing of lines. Precisely what I discussed earlier. As U.S. Supreme Court Justice Souter noted in his dissenting opinion in Bush versus Vera, 517 U.S. 952 at 1047-48, 1996. The court has accordingly assumed over the years that traditional districting principles widely accepted among states represented an informal baseline of acceptable districting practices. We have thus accorded substantial respect to such traditional principles as those, for example, are meant to preserve the integrity of the neighborhood communities and to protect incumbents, to following existing political boundaries, to recognize the communities of interest, and to achieve compactness. Justice Souter goes on to note that the fundamental tenet behind most of those constitutional appropriate redistricting principles is that their voting is more than an optimistic exercise. As such, because the redistricting committee was improperly instructed not to include this important traditional principle of redistricting, despite being directed to do so by the state comptroller's office, and because of the impact this will have on the fundamental ideal that citizens voted for their representatives be respected and not changed by redrawing a district line. The redistricting committee should not be adopted. The general committee's map should be adopted according to the amounts for these considerations, and I therefore ask the members of BOMA to vote for the general committee's map. Thank you. Jim Stocks, 104 Downing Court, Ward 4. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Alderman Brown. Alderman Collins.
I wanted to ask a couple questions for Mr. Bradley. Mr. Bradley, in 2022, when we have our next round of elections, Jonathan Hayes would be in the new Ward 2, and that term would expire, but the term that would normally expire in 2024, there would not be a representative currently. So would we elect a 2-year term and a 4-year term at that time?
In my opinion, if this plan is passed, that's what you would do. It would have a 2-year term and a 4-year term, both on the ballot in 2022.
Which would mean we would have an extra alderman. We would have 13 instead of 12.
Well, and if we did what the mayor said, though, that he had a plan, the other plan was that if Mr. Peterson continued to represent Ward 2, you wouldn't have to do that. You'd just have a 4-year term that Mr. Hayes would run for. And then in 2 years, you'd have another 4-year term.
Let me interrupt real quick. That was actually a proposal that was brought by Mr. Bradley when we met. It wasn't my plan. That was option 2 that he presented.
Okay. Is that, so I assume that the charter allows for people to not live in their ward?
No, the charter doesn't address redistricting at all. What the charter talks about are rules we have to follow when we reduce the number of wards, which we can't increase the number because we're already bigger than state law typically requires. It gives us some guidelines based on those principles of reducing the number of wards. For example, if we reduce the number of wards so that you, for example, who've been elected until 2024, if we redistricted so that you lost your ward because we went from 12 aldermen to 6, let's say, or 12 to 8 or whatever, you would continue to serve as an at-large. That's the only prohibition, the only provision in our charter to have an at-large is when you reduce the number of aldermen. I think that the mayor's proposal is one way that does the least damage in that it avoids ever having 13 aldermen, because our charter does not allow us to increase the term. Now, whether we could do it as a transition, for a 2-year period, that's just, 7 votes can do it. And, someone could challenge that and say your charter says you're not supposed to increase the number. So I think that if we adopt this plan, the plan that was passed on first reading, we need to try to implement it in such a way that we still only have 12 aldermen. I think that's the sounder course.
Alderman Collins, anything else?
Yes. In the letter that I received as well from the constituent, he referenced this case in the Shaw case, and that the body should take into consideration protection of incumbents, and what that means is to respect the vote of the people who voted for the incumbents. And he is asserting that that was part of the comptroller's guidelines. Do you agree with that from a legal perspective?
Well, Mr. Brown read the passage from the controller's guidelines from page 10.
So legally, that is accurate, and
the controller's
map
guidelines, let me explain what this,
that.
I think, sort of give the background for this. And in 1993, there was a case that went to the United States Supreme Court having to do with gerrymandering of a congressional district in North Carolina. And in that case, white voters brought an action against the state and against the Justice Department saying that this district was created for minorities. And the opposite arguments you usually hear, racial discrimination cases. And the Supreme Court said that they had a good case, that by a 5-4 decision, they said that you shouldn't create a district to elect a white or to elect a minority. And it was, like I said, it was a 5-4 decision. And one of the dissenters, in his dissenting opinion, made the statement that Mr. Brown read a while ago, to the fact that when you're doing gerrymandering, when you're doing redistricting, in order to avoid the appearance that it might be for some illegal purpose, such as racial discrimination, that you look at the traditional principles. And it says should. It's a guideline, and
Okay.
that's there.
Okay. So if someone were to file a suit, and I don't even know how they would do that, with the map as it is in our ordinance, would they have grounds based on this information? This is a Supreme Court case.
I would, if that happened, I think the city's defense would be, this body is the one actually approving a plan, not the committee. So this body is certainly considering where people live, because each of you know where you live. But it's supposed to be a consideration, and this body is making that consideration right now. So I think that, as the mayor said all along, this is just an advisory committee. They're not gonna, they don't have control of the decisions ultimately made by 7 votes to this board. So I think that would be the defense. I think that would be a sound thing that the board did consider it.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that a lot. Yeah.
Alderman Collins, thank you. Anything else? Appreciate it. We've got nobody else wishing to speak. Are we ready electronically, Tina? We're not? Okay. I'm sorry. Alderman Peterson.
Thank you, Mayor. My name's been brought up a lot tonight. And for that reason, I spent Sunday looking at these maps again because, frankly, the Titans game wasn't very interesting. And I also went back and I read the comptroller's instructions for redistricting. And one of the things that pops out is item number E. It says districts shall be reasonably compact and contiguous and shall not overlap. And so I was looking at the maps, and it also goes on to say, from the comptroller's instructions, although the redistricting principle of reasonably compact may be somewhat subjective in nature, contiguous is more easily understood. Simply put, a district must be one homogeneous piece of land, not split into 2 discrete areas. So I go back and the redistricting committee did just that. Their wards are compact and they're not split like the general committee's map is. And also, I was elected to represent Ward 2, and I always said when I campaigned I would be for the majority of the residents. And the majority of people who've reached out to me this week are in favor of the citizens redistricting map. And for that reason, I will be supporting their map tonight, and I encourage the board to do so as well. Thank you.
Alderman Peterson, thank you. Alderman Petrelli.
Thank you, Mayor. All right. I jotted down a few words to help me get through this discussion about redistricting. On first reading, I will reiterate what I stated then, which is that I value that we have citizen committees to explore any given subject matter regarding our city. Many recommendations are brought to BOMA through various citizen-led committees, boards, and commissions. As I stated at the last meeting, I have seen BOMA reject recommendations, accept recommendations, but the majority of what I've seen is tweaking. compromise. And that's part of the art up here, it's compromise. Decisions should be about what is in the broader best interest of our city. Change is inevitable, but how that change is handled with compromise and delicate discussions could make our city stronger, more cohesive. Specifically, with the plan that the General Committee has proposed, it is a compromise by accomplishing the goal with the least amount of disruption to our city. The current wards are not remaining exactly the same in the General Committee's proposal, but they're moving the district lines to adjust to the growth of our citizenry. To me, that should have been the process all along, and that's what I asked for when we voted on the committee, on the hand-chosen committee. Tweaking the boundaries, making sure that everyone has the least amount of disruption to their representation. What I was not prepared for was the drastic changing of those boundaries with reasons explained to me that could not justify the end result of that two-meeting labor. I've seen a lot of written material suggesting that politics was the impetus for having a committee established to review the subject instead of having the city's professional planning department come up with the proposed solution, which is what has been done in the past. BOMA voted upon citizens to sit on this committee, which the mayor selected, with the exception of one who BOMA added to that committee. Regardless of any word semantics, redistricting is a political process because we're going to vote on it. That makes it political. So taking politics out of it really is not a talking point that can be used any longer to justify anything in this vote. A day or two after the first reading, the mayor put up a social media post making statements about 6 aldermen. 6 aldermen who complained and other such things regarding the redistricting, and then specifically named me and 5 others. Well, I'm here to tell you that those statements appear to be false or a misstatement. I did not attend either general committee meeting regarding these discussions. I was not present. I made no statements about the redistricting to anyone. Anyone's willing to testify to that or counter out that, bring it on. I made no comments at the last BOMA meeting about redistricting. I spoke specifically to how we appreciate our committees, boards that are led by citizens. It's interesting to see a dedicated advocate like Pat Campbell fight for his ward. Pat and I didn't always agree on any given subject matter. We didn't always vote alike. Sometimes we did, sometimes we didn't. But we could walk out of this room and be friendly, and he could be friendly with anybody up here. So to portray Pat as a complainer is interesting, because anybody that knew Pat Campbell knew that man did not complain. He did his work with a smile on his face for everyone, for his family, friends, and constituents. When you make a post specifically naming people that we no longer need in our community representing us, me, Cunningham, Brown, Hayes, Collins, and Pat Campbell, I don't see how much clearer you can be about what the motivation is, and it pollutes the process. How much more political can you get? As many have said, we would be blessed to have more representatives like Pat Campbell in our community. As the proposed map from the General Committee stands now, it is not a complete reversion to the wards as they stand now. There is compromise. There are still significant changes towards 1, 2, 4, and 5. In that compromise, some citizens will lose their elected representation. But if BOMA members work together through that transition, they can help constituents get to know their new officials who they did not vote for. That's what we should be concerned as leaders right now. I've already had folks from Ward 2 reach out to me saying, hey, I want to get to know you because I didn't vote for you. I don't know you. We have elections so that folks can choose their representatives. That's the reality of the situation. Like us or lump us, we were all chosen up here. We were voted upon. Voting on a plan that has the least impact of disenfranchising voters and working together to make it a smoother process for constituents to cut down on the inevitable confusion that will be coming. In that line, I support the General Committee's plan, which I would like to see an amendment put on the table for that out of the General Committee. Now, I do want to address some of the comments per se that I've heard today, and I appreciate the citizens who came up and spoke today, all with passion. We have some folks saying you shouldn't worry about driving too far across town. You have other folks saying you're going to drive too far across town. And they both wanted the same end result, which was the redistricting committee plan. So that in itself shows you that people have very diverse opinions and understanding of any of our given subject matter that we're voting on. What my concern is, as a representative of Ward 1, and with my partner Mark, is that we're in the oldest section of town. And therefore, you see infrastructural breakdowns systemically at this point based on age. And we kind of had 3 people on the peninsula. We kind of worked as a cohesive group, per se. And with this new Ward 2 proposed redistricting, it really lessens the opportunity for the peninsula to possibly have 3 people representing them again. But with that being said, I'm going to support the General Committee's map, should it get put on the table. I appreciate everyone that had mature conversation about this subject matter and didn't dive into nastiness. And whatever the vote may be, we as representatives need to be working on making sure that constituents know, who they need to turn to. But voting for the least amount of disruption in our city while meeting the legal requirements of redistricting should be our top priority. Thank you.
Alderman Petrelli, thank you. We've got 4 members here from the Redistricting Committee. I want to, if y'all could head up here, I've got a couple questions for you. We've got Tim, we've got Pat, we've got Mike, and we've got Aaron. And this is a question that came up in the committee, but I don't think it came up when we voted on this last time, is that the map that the Redistricting Committee came up with, and we have half of you here tonight, that was a unanimous vote. Am I correct about that?
Correct. That's correct.
Okay. If y'all could, tell us a little bit of, and we've heard a couple comments about that map, and feel free to speak for 2 seconds or for as long as you really want, but give us an idea of how you came to that map.
Well, my name's Mike Tummins. I've lived in Hendersonville for 47 years. Change is tough. But the map was brought to us by Mr. Free, basically. The maps, he brought us several options on maps. The one we chose, I think we tweaked it just a little bit. But basically, we used Mr. Free from the Planning Department's map, and it was 100% based on population. We did exactly what they said, compact, contiguous, no gerrymandering. Fortunately, Hendersonville doesn't have a high minority population in one section, so we were able to avoid that. But that's how we came up with the map. Two maps, because of the one map was 4 wards with 2 aldermen, because that's what the state really recommends, but we're grandfathered in with what we have now. So that's how we came up with the map.
Appreciate it. Anybody else want to mention that?
Yeah, one of the main things that we considered when redrawing the maps were, obviously, as I think somebody had discussed over there, under the element of a ward being compact and contiguous, one of the main concerns you have is, A, the districts should be homogeneous, and also they should have common interests. And that's where I think where the peninsula wards in particular were lacking, and that was one of, if you line up the current district map for anybody to look at, the most obvious thing that jumps out at you is how the peninsulas are divided up. And the Supreme Court does state that appearances do matter. And, when you look at where the community interests lie in the peninsula areas, obviously, people who live on the Indian Lake Peninsula have similar or more direct interest with other people that live on the Indian Lake Peninsula. And people that live on Walton Ferry Peninsula have similar interests that with people that live on their peninsula. Anywhere from infrastructure, I think was mentioned, traffic, schools, crime, property values, other nuisances, right? So, nuisances, excuse me. So the thing is yes, we're supposed to, and I think someone mentioned we're supposed to consider the protection of incumbents. Well, first of all, the Shaw case, I don't know if the facts in that case are really analogous to what we're trying to accomplish here, because the facts in that case were strictly regarding racial gerrymandering. And I mean, they went as far as one of the districts gerrymandered 168 miles, if I remember reading that correctly. And it was all for the purpose of scooping up black constituents into and so that's what they were trying to do as far as protecting incumbents. We, as a citizens committee, did not consider whether we're creating a new district because we're trying to get rid of an incumbent or protect an incumbent. We were looking at what makes sense. What makes sense to the people that reside on the peninsulas? Now, the people in Ward 3, 6, and 5, there weren't many changes made. I mean, except for Ward 5, because Ward 5 had, I think, 3,500 more people than they needed to have in order to fall within the correct deviation range under federal law. So, I don't know why the peninsulas were divided the way they were back 10, 15 years ago, or whenever they split Ward 2, or made Ward 2 the west half of Indian Lake Peninsula and east half of Walton Ferry Peninsula. Maybe it was because the numbers weren't right to fall within that deviation range, and so they couldn't make each peninsula their own ward. But what better ward to have than have a ward that has natural boundaries? There's one way in and out of those peninsulas. There's 2 or 3 roads, I think. So our interests on the peninsula, I live in Ward 4, at the far end of the Indian Lake Peninsula. My neighbor across the street from me is in Ward 2. Now, does he have more common interests with me as to what happens on our neighborhood or in our community, or does he have something more in common with the person who lives over on Walton Ferry Peninsula? I think it's pretty obvious. So, I think at some point, I think now is a good time. Why they had the split back in the day, I don't know, but we have the population necessary now to make each peninsula their own ward. Appearances matter. We have the same interests on the Indian Lake Peninsula. We have the same concerns. Examples would be the Beatty Farm. Or I know Representative or Alderman Campbell a couple months ago was advocating for money to be allocated for road work on Saunders Ferry Road. Now, I know there's some roads on Indian Lake Peninsula that could use some road work themselves. I always question, how is there not a conflict of interest with one ward or with one alderman representing, half of Indian Lake Peninsula and half of Walton Ferry Peninsula? There's conflicts of interest that arise, I'm sure, all the time. Because where do you vote? Do you vote to send the money to Walton Ferry Peninsula, or do you vote to send the money to the Indian Lake Peninsula? So one way to rectify that is to make each peninsula their own ward, as the Citizens Committee did. And that was one of the main reasons why we did that. And so one other thing is that, I don't know if there's any issues with that ward, that I call it the yellow ward because I don't know how they're going to be numbered, but the yellow ward that we proposed in the center, is when you look at it from a common interest standpoint, all those people either live in, adjacent to, or within very close proximity to the commercial district. Who has more interest in what happens as a resident in the commercial district than those people that live in or around the commercial district? So I think they have very close, very direct community interest, and they would be a great ward in and of itself. So that's how we came up with why we felt it was time to make each peninsula a ward. And it wasn't our goal to unseat anybody. In fact, I have no political agendas. I have no political interest. I am solely here to do what made sense. The common sense is all I was looking at. What makes sense? So that's why I think the Citizens Committee, presented a map that makes sense, that is in the best interest of the citizens of Hendersonville, primarily the people that live on the peninsulas. Again, wards 3, 6, and 5, I don't know why you would oppose it, because it's not really affecting your wards. So those changes that were made up there would have had to have been made anyway because of the growth that those wards have seen in the last 10 years. So Ward 5 was going to lose 3,500 people regardless. So all this is affecting are the citizens that live on or near the peninsulas.
Anybody else? So, by the way, that's Timothy Johnson, attorney, Ward 4 Alderman. Anybody else?
I'm Aaron Hawkins. I was also on the Redistricting Committee, and so thank you for allowing me to serve the community. I am also apolitical, strictly apolitical. I don't have any social media accounts. I don't delve into that.
I don't either, by the way.
I can't tell you how many times the phrase compact and contiguous was said in those redistricting. Nonstop, we were saying compact and contiguous. We had a single citizen show up to our meetings, and she was one of the citizens from one of the peninsulas that said, "I don't know why my across the street neighbor is in a different ward. It doesn't make sense to me." She was the single person that showed up. We love to hear from her. My mother taught me if it doesn't make common sense, it doesn't make any sense. So that's the baseline. And so what we started with was baseline. I have 2 mathematics degrees. I've always let the numbers kind of fall out what the answer is going to be. And that's what we did here. It wasn't that we didn't want to know where anybody lived, not because it was political or non-political. We just wanted the numbers to fall out. We just wanted to know that the cross-section of the homogeneous, and I'm using the word directly from the comptroller, the homogeneous nature, that we followed the spirit and the letter of the comptroller's instructions, not one or the other. We did both. Keith Free developed these maps wonderfully. Anytime we said, "Hey, what happens if you do this? How does it fall out?" Because the numbers spelled it. We had to adhere to what was called a 10% variance. So you had your average. You tried not to go 5% below or 5% above the net of those two being 10%. The numbers yielded every single time. The numbers yielded. It made common sense, and that's what we proposed. I'm very proud of what we put together. Our decisions were made in a unanimous fashion because we stated our position, and nobody stood firm on where they stood. I know that you and I had a couple of disagreements throughout, but then we compromised. I think just that's what Peg Petrelli said. We compromised, and that's where we came That's what we came up with, the solution that we had. It makes common sense. And so my mom would be proud, looking down from heaven, that it made common sense. So that's where we started.
Can I just ask one question, Mr. Bradley? I believe, did you not say that if we were to adopt, or if you all were to adopt the citizens map, that you would continue your representation of your ward until your term expires, correct?
You'd continue representation. We'd have one exception. We haven't made the decision about how to do the transition.
Okay.
We're first deciding if this is going to be the map, and then we have to wrestle with the issue of how we're going to implement it.
Right. My point being is because I've heard a lot of, but some of the aldermen are saying, or some of the people that are saying, hey, you know, we elected these aldermen and we want them to represent us. But then I also heard you're going to be able to serve your term to completion. Now, you may have to run again against somebody else that maybe you don't want to run against, but you get to serve your term. I never heard that you're just going to be booted, so.
Everyone gets to continue to serve
So
their
that
term.
should not be considered at all, that whether or not you're doing what's in the, best interest of your constituents, you get to finish your term. So I think that's important to know.
Pat, did you go ahead?
Pat Collins. It's ironic how the gentleman who moved here 8 years ago, we've been here 10 years. And at that time, the census was taking place. We were moved from Ward 5, it's still ironic, and Ward 2, in which we are discussing tonight. The challenges. As my counterparts have said, it is, when we looked at the maps, and if you look at the county, we did not have to hire anyone to come in to help us with this. We have a department that was truly trained and to handle census, and that's the planning department. They gave us everything that was needed. And even though it was a 2-hour training session, it helped. We looked at the numbers, and the committee asked Mr. Free's department to give us what we requested. We had at least, I believe, 10 days, 10 to 12 days to look at what was requested before we met at our second meeting. We were serious. None of us are experts, but we were guided with a plan, the comptroller, guidelines that we strictly followed. Now, the decision, and I have no political agenda either, even though I was appointed by the state of Tennessee as an election commissioner for Sumner County. I was not voted in. I can be booted out tomorrow. Does it bother me? No. Because as a taxpayer of Hendersonville, the state of Tennessee, the county of Sumner, I do have a voice. And everyone in this county, in this city, have voices. It is left up to you, as the charter states. Yes, you do make the final decision. And when we moved from Ward 5 to Ward 2, being an aggressive person as I am that all of you already know, I called my new alderman and introduced myself to that person, to that team. Not only did I do it, but all of my neighbors also did it because I gave them your names. So it's a matter of adaptability. We all know nothing is perfect 100%. Some people will be happy, some people will be angry, but we will adapt. And in condolences from the Collins family to the Campbell family, we wish you to a good recovery, and may God cover you through these difficult times.
Okay, thank you. If y'all could hang out for a minute, I'm not saying you need to stand up, but if you could stay near, I think that would be good. Alderman Waters.
Thank you, Mayor. I said before in the first reading that you people did a great job, fantastic job. I said in all your meetings, listened to you very carefully, and nothing was ever mentioned or said about politics in my presence. Never. The only question I have for you right now, did you ever get a call from anybody on this board? Anybody?
No.
I didn't think you did. because you would have mentioned it in your meetings if you had, and I would have been highly upset. But in saying that, I want to be sure we take the politics out of this. You people, you don't know me from Adam. I might be the governor's nephew, I don't know. But anyway, you did a fantastic job. You did the work that this board gave you. And with the help of planning director, I could sit there and listen to y'all talk all night, at both of your meetings. You did a thorough job. You didn't sway by anybody that said anything or nothing. So I wish and I hope this board would forget about politics when it comes to a decision to vote on this tonight. You mentioned Ward 3, 5, and 6. We got it made. I don't see why these three aldermen of 3 wards would want to vote against anything that you've presented. It's great. I understand about 2 and 4, but your remarks that I've heard over the past months will eliminate any problems that they expect. Now, I want to say one more thing, and I don't mean to put cold water on anybody, but when I got a call yesterday about what was on the social media about this meeting tonight, I was really disturbed. I got 12 calls, and I've got every one of them right in my book, but I'm not going to read them because they was all upset about what they saw and how it was read and what the thought was behind the Facebook article. It was devastating. I can't describe it. And I think most people know what I'm referring to. It was, the people called me was upset. They was really upset. But let's forget about that. I want to again express my personal concern because I'm going to vote for it because I know what you did. You did a great job. All of you. And you should be awarded for us agreeing with what you recommend. We didn't pay you to do this, I don't think, but anyway, did we?
We did not.
But anyway, all kidding aside, from my heart, I think you did a great job, and I will support this decision. Thank you, Mayor.
Alderman Waters, thank you. Alderman Collins, I'm going to go to Alderman Robertson since he hasn't spoken yet, and then I'll come back to you. Okay, Alderman Robertson.
I'd also, again, want to thank the committee. Your comments tonight, your behavior over the past several months has done more to maintain and restore my confidence in the average citizen of our city more than I've ever felt before. Our forefathers had it right when they established a democracy, because they trusted the people, and I just want to thank you for the sterling performance, for the integrity of your actions, and for the transparency of everything that you did. I have received several emails and calls as well, and not one person criticized the integrity of the Citizens Committee. This was a unique way of handling this. It's not the politically expedient way that governments usually handle this situation. But the mayor had foresight, and this board had this agreed with the nominations, and I think that it's panned out exceptionally well. I like what one of the speakers said, common sense. Unfortunately, in political circles today, that is a endangered species. But I can sense, I can see, I can feel common sense permeating throughout your effort. I also, I'm not going to read a whole letter as my right honorable friend, Mr. Brown did, but I do want to just mention, I received a letter today, and I asked her if it is okay if I quoted some of it from Gail Haygood. Gail Haygood lives in Ward 2. And just briefly, she said, I have lived at 135 Woodvale Drive on the Indian Lake Peninsula for 39 years. My residence was in Ward 4 until my part of the peninsula was put in Ward 2 with the Walton Ferry Peninsula. Currently, Ward 2 has 6,526 residents on the Walton Ferry Peninsula and 3,558 residents on the Indian Lake Peninsula. The majority of the Indian Lake Peninsula residents are in Ward 4. I am strongly in favor of the redistricting plan proposed by the Citizens Redistricting Committee, which would eliminate the current division of Ward 2 between peninsulas. This plan equalizes the population of the districts and puts most of the Indian Lake Peninsula under the same ward. In my analysis of, and really what I tried to do is what plan best comports with the guidelines of the state comptroller and state law. And so in my analysis, one of the things I looked at is the deviation from the ideal population. The ideal population, as calculated by our staff, for each ward is 10,292. The Citizens Committee recommendation best meets that ideal population. Now, why is the ideal population important? Why is it important that we try to get as close to that ideal population as possible? This is the reason, because we're not going to look at this again for 10 years. And it's important that we get as close as we can, because there are going to continue to be changes in this city. And if we start out with a wide, disparate number from the ideal population, it may only get worse. And it may only lead to a further, what I would call a decline of representation government. One person, one vote. Under the proposal that the General Committee passed, Ward 3 has a population of 9,713 voters. That is almost 580 voters, population away from the ideal population. The Citizens Committee does not have anything near that wide of variation. So to me, while neither of these plans is perfect, and I don't question the motive of any alderman regardless of how they vote, but in my humble opinion, the citizens' recommendation better comports with the guidelines of this state and provides for better representation of the whole city for the future. You know, when I was elected, I put something in my billfold. And in that billfold, I put down 4 things that I wanted to help guide me in my deliberations before this board. I want to read what those 4 are. It's kind of soiled now because I played golf and it's sweated through my billfold, but the words are still, I think, appropriate. The first is, don't lose your cool. Now, sometimes board, I apologize, I have lost my cool. Amen. I have lost it at times, but I apologize for that. But that's an important character. Don't lose your cool. Number 2, seek consensus. I've tried my best to seek consensus. Number 3, always vote your conscience, regardless of the political consequences. And number 4, pray for wisdom. I have deliberated because this is a tough decision. This is a decision that we're going to live with, and our citizens are going to live with for 10 years. But I have no doubt that our citizens will adapt. I have no doubt that another Pat Campbell will rise up from one of these wards and represent their citizens as well as he did. So I have faith that this plan will work. I hope that we can come to a decision tonight, because I've reached out to the County Election Commission, and they've told me, or one commissioner particularly said, everybody else has submitted their plans. Please, Hendersonville, make a decision so that the staff can get busy and implement the wards and the maps. So I hope that we can make a decision tonight. We're not going to all be together, but I hope that after tonight we can still walk out as friends and colleagues and move this city forward. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
I do intend to vote for the citizens' recommendation. Thank you.
Alderman Robertson, thank you. Alderman Collins.
Thank you. Like Alderman Robertson, I do respect the differences in opinion from the other aldermen, and I don't think it makes anybody a bad person or means you have ulterior motives. I have been dreading this for a while because I knew Ward 5 that I represent had experienced astronomical growth, and that we were going to be separating a lot of, we would lose a lot of our constituents. And on a personal level, it feels like empty nester syndrome all over again. I'm kind of sad about it and worried, and I'll still be checking to make sure that certain neighborhoods have little issues that are ongoing and that kind of thing. But before we had the numbers, I didn't know how bad it was going to be, and it turns out Ward 5, the growth was even higher than I had imagined. So I was really in shock, and until it was several weeks in the process, I think the redistricting committee had actually finished or nearly finished their work before aldermen were given the block data. So I had been so concerned because I guess I thought 8,000 people lived on Saundersville Road, and they don't. But I was so concerned that Saundersville Road was going to have to be split. And I didn't know, and I still don't, would that benefit them? They would potentially have had 4 aldermen. Or would it be better to still have 2 and stay together and have a focused representation, or 4 votes versus 2? I still don't know which is better. And while I know Ward 5 like the back of my hand, it's where I live, I don't know the peninsulas as well. I was working on the Walton Ferry Peninsula today, and sometimes I still have to use my GPS to get off that peninsula. Same with Indian Lake. I'm like, where did the street even come from? I've lived here over 20 years. I don't know those peninsulas as well, but I do know that the Sanders Ferry Walton Ferry Peninsula has unique issues that the rest of the city doesn't have. They are so impacted by growth and density issues that Ward 4 is not impacted by those issues as much. So, right or wrong, I don't worry about Ward 4 as much. I got the same email that Alderman Roberson got, and it made me reflect once again. Is it better for Saunders Ferry to have 4 aldermen or not? I don't know the answer to that. But I do know that while I've been elected to represent Ward 5, we do set up here to represent the whole city and to think of the whole city. And my concern in this is heavily focused on the current Ward 2 and the division that they will be getting, kind of, some of them go to this ward and some go to that ward. A lot of this for that ward is now moot because of, unfortunately, Alderman Campbell's passing. We will be appointing somebody. That's not avoidable. It's extreme situation with a death where we appoint somebody and you don't get to vote. But we do serve out our term until, I was elected in 2020, so I serve until 2024. And being in Ward 5, as you said, even though when you look at the numbers, you would think Ward 5 would be the most largely impacted because we need it to change. We're not the most largely impacted ward by this map, which kind of makes me scratch my head. Did we use the numbers? We did. I know that you did. But it's not what I would have anticipated. If I get the numbers, Ward 5 is off from that 10,295 more than any other ward. But we're not the most impacted. We don't have the most people moving in and out. That was a surprise to me, that it was Ward 2 by twice the number of Ward 5. Even though they almost had the right number of people in their ward to start with. So, okay, how is this going to affect them? But between 2022, when this starts, those of us who are elected in 2024, not me personally, but others that will have be in a new ward or have new constituents coming into their ward, those are the people that you're assigned, or are assigned to you more aptly, and they didn't vote for you. That's where the representation, or the lack of representation and the lack of vote comes from. They voted for somebody who no longer represents them. Of course, we know we're all going to represent everybody, but respecting that vote is what concerns me. And the redistricting committee's map displaces 15,189 people. The general committee map displaces 7,721 people. I don't like either of those numbers, but I'll take the one that's less, because I think that that vote is the most fundamental thing that we have as citizens. And I respect those that were cast, and I respect those that will be cast. And for me, the general committee's map shows respect for that vote. And with that said, I would like to make an amendment that we adopt the general committee's map.
So we have a motion and a second to amend our ordinance here. This would replace the redistricting committee's map with the general committee's map.
I do need to say one more thing. It came to my attention today, and I confirmed with Director Free that the area of Candlewood and Lakeside Park Drive was inaccurate on the maps that we started with as our current ward map. And so that inaccuracy followed through into the general committee's map, and that needs to be changed. And Director Free said it's 300 and some people, and that it was acceptable to move that to Ward 2. Am I from, okay. And I don't know if we need to look at that on the screen, but I need to include that with this amendment. The census block, including Candlewood Drive.
Keith, is that a good enough description? Okay. So, yeah, come on up, please.
And I apologize because I don't really know what this is about, just that a constituent brought it to my attention, and I.
Yes, and I think what this is we have the whole software from the Tennessee Comptroller, and so that's in the block groups, and then we best fit the existing board map in there, but then that's what the general committee started with. I think what might be the appropriate language would be to adopt the latest version of the general committee map, and with including that changes be made to bring the Candlewood Drive area back to the current line of where the current ward map is, and then I think that would suffice to do it.
You all okay with that wording?
It's not a fundamental change, it's correcting an error.
Okay.
Alderman Petrelli, are you okay with that wording? Okay, thank you. So the motion we have, and it's been properly seconded, is to replace the Citizens Committee map with the General Committee map and with this one addition. Alderman Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. Director Free, I believe when that was discussed the second time, it wasn't only Candlewood, but that we had a tiny, very tiny block at the bottom of La Vista, Meadow Lake. It encompassed a couple hundred people that need to be fixed.
And what we're going with is the version 2 that corrected that in the most recent general committee meeting where that was discussed, and we made that correction. So that's already incorporated within there.
Alderman Brown,
within that
anything else?
version
Yes.
2.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Free. Yeah, a couple of things that I just want to, I've jotted notes here, and I think they're important to mention for some folks that haven't lived here that long, that the Ward 2 has been the way it is for 20 years. It was done 20 years ago. So, just that's an FYI, because I heard 10 years, 15 years, it's been 20 years. So,
Yeah, you got turned off at some point. There you go.
where did I get turned off at?
Everything back there seems to be recorded, so you're okay.
Okay. Well, I just, folks are folks. I've sat up here a long time, and when I vote, it's not just all Ward 4. It's for the city. I've actually voted against some things that I would think would be in favor for my ward because it was better for the city to go the other way. And so it's not all typically ward oriented. I think when you run for an aldermanship that you do try to protect your ward. That's your job. You take the pothole calls, you take the trash calls, you take every call there is to call. And but you try to look out for the city. I personally think the general committee's plan, the one that passed Alderman Campbell helped put together, is the best one for the city because it displaces less people. Ward 2 is still split. You can take the 20-year-old plan and it's split. You take the redistricting committee's plan, it's still somewhat split, and it jumps across Gallatin Road. So I understand why you made those decisions. I don't agree with them, but I hold no malice toward you, and I hope you hold no malice toward the way I feel, because two of you sitting over there in my ward. I don't want you really mad at me. That being said, I'll vote for the general committee's plan and hope it works well. If it doesn't work well, then I hope my friends in Ward 2, Ward 1, Ward 3, 5, and 6, and 4 will all get along, and we'll come out the other side being a stronger city than we are now. Thank you.
Alderman Brown, thank you. Timothy, you want to give us your thoughts on this? No, that's one of the things I wanted to ask, is we have never asked the Citizens Redistricting Committee their opinion of this other map.
I just wanted to address a couple things. From Alderman Brown, you just stated, I think you were probably directing that comment towards me. I was in no way trying to say that Walton Ferry people are better than Indian Lake people or vice versa, but I think it's logical to assume that, you know, when I live at the end of the Indian Lake Peninsula, am I as worried about the traffic on Walton Ferry Peninsula? No, not really. It doesn't affect me, right? Am I as worried about, now, we all have a general interest in the welfare of the city of Hendersonville. I get that. Obviously, we want every place to be safe, prosperous. I get that. But am I as worried about the property values on Walton Ferry as compared to on Indian Lake? You know, if that Beatty Farm would have went in and we had a big, you know, dense 250, you know, home subdivision there, would that have affected my, you know, Walton Ferry doesn't have to worry about that peninsula. Am I worried about the school impact? Are my kids going to have more kids are my kids going to have more kids in their classes because of the influx of people into my community? So we do have different worries. I get we're all the same. We all live in Hendersonville, but we have varying specific neighborhood interests that are different from what Walton Ferry Peninsula has. And that was our whole point, is one of the main factors that we were to consider are community interests, which are common interests within a community, a neighborhood. I had never heard that mentioned in the general committee meeting, in the second BOMA meeting. I've never heard anyone who opposes the citizens map talk anything about, hey, is our map, does it take into consideration what's best for the community? I've never heard anybody mention that. Nobody who opposes the citizens map mentioned anything about in the best interest of the citizens. So they, you know, I watched the general committee meeting, and, you know, we spent 2 to 3 weeks studying and deliberating amongst each other, trying to come up with something that makes sense, all right? And Alderman Collins, you stated that there's a large discrepancy in numbers, 7,000 in the opposition map, I'm going to call it, and 15,000 in the citizens map. And you just say you're very uncomfortable with the discrepancies, but there was purpose behind that. We weren't just recklessly skewing lines because we wanted to get the numbers right in the deviation history. We had purpose for that. The reason why there's such a great variance is because we felt the peninsulas needed to be their own ward, and we needed to get those people in the same ward together. So in order to do that, we had to take the western side of the Indian Lake Peninsula and move them into Ward 4, and take the eastern side of Walton Ferry Peninsula and move them in with their other residents on Walton Ferry Peninsula. It made sense. And so we had purpose behind it. We were trying to act recklessly. It was purposeful. So to say that the numbers are so much different, but there's reason behind it, is my point. And so, you know, we took all the factors into consideration when we did our map. When I watched the general meeting committee, the only factor I saw being taken into consideration, and I'm not over exaggerating, when moves were made, we moved 5,000 or 500 from one to another. The first question typically was, did that affect any of the alderman seats? Are you guys still in your same ward? Are you still in your same ward? That's what it was. After every move they made with that one map, they asked that question. So as a citizen, just watching the general committee meeting, of course, my natural reaction was, all they are is looking out for their self-preservation. That's it. Well, that's what it came. I know you're shaking your head, Alderman Collins, but that's what, as a layperson just watching the general committee meeting, it looked like self-preservation and self-interest.
I'll come back to you. Hold on.
No, right, and I'm not. Look, it's just I'm just advising you all of the perception that I gained. Like I said, I don't watch these.
Point of order.
Hold on. He can continue. He was
We
asked a
have
couple.
people in the queue prior to this, to you.
We
bringing it back
have
up.
suspended the rules to hear from him and hear
You
from the members of the
suspended
committee.
the rules.
I said
All
without
right.
objection, and nobody
I'm
objected.
done. I apologize if I went too long. I'm done.
I apologize, Joe. I asked without objection, and nobody objected at that time, as we have several times allowed people who are not on this board to speak. We did it the exact same way tonight as we've done it many other times. Alderman Skidmore.
I've got a quick question and some observations with this. So Keith, or Mr. Free, so I just want to get this straight because this is kind of, it's not important to the whole board, but it is kind of important for me on a personal deal here. So you're telling me that all this time that, what was the road over there in Ward that we thought was in Ward 2, but it's Ward 3, but it is Ward 3, that we're wanting to make? What was that statement over there?
On Candlewood?
Yes, Candlewood
Yeah.
subdivision.
Candlewood, a portion of Candlewood is actually in the existing ward map like that we have right now.
Right.
And so when the general committee started with the software, they started on our best fit map that just worked with where all the block groups were. Okay. And so they started that and started moving. They didn't move that area, but that area was not correct on that move. It doesn't really impact anything with the redistricting committee,
I know,
but it does with the version of the general committee.
Let me tell you, I'll get to that for just in a second. So Candlewood subdivision, what ward is it right now? What would you consider? Two or 3?
Is all of it in 2, or? We can pull it up and
Well,
and take a
no,
look at it.
I don't want you to go to that detail
Yeah.
because it's important to me, and I'll tell you why. Because I had several calls over the years, at least 10 years worth, that I said Candlewood is in Ward 2.
It is Ward 2.
Okay.
Yeah. Nothing's changed.
All right,
For
so,
that yeah.
so
And
Ward
then
3
with-
has nothing to do with Candlewood subdivision, right?
It's close.
No,
Well, I
Ward
know
1
it's
is
close.
close.
Not
Ward
close,
1 is
Ward
close.
is. Ward 1 is close, but Ward 3 is.
I mean, not
Yeah.
Ward 3, I apologize.
it's
I'm
Ward 1,
starting to show my age right there.
Yeah, you're close.
I'm going back to my days in Ward 3, you know.
It's just right across the street
I
there.
know
on
it
Ward
is.
1,
So
yeah.
my point is, Ward 1, that was there any, and I'm deeply sorry about that. Now I'm focused. I'm fired up. So it's not in Ward 1. Candlewood subdivision, any houses are not in Ward 1. Because I remember we talked about this at our last meeting, and I had heard that it was in Ward 1. I'm going, no way, because it couldn't be. So, yes or no? That's my question to you for that.
Let me pull it up to give you the
Okay,
definite.
you can just pull
the
that up
definite
because
answer,
it's
yeah.
not really prevalent, and I
Right.
appreciate the board's indulgence.
Mark, I can help you.
Because it really, somebody could object to me by even asking that, because it doesn't apply to what we're talking about.
Right.
So if you all can do that on your own
Yes.
time, because I have an apology over an issue over there that I probably could have helped those people. Now I'm just really upset at myself because I could have helped them with their swimming pool that they had there.
Right.
And I said, you need to talk to your alderman. And hell, they were talking to him if they were
Right.
talking to me.
Alderman Skidmore, you're fine. It's always been in Ward 2, still is in Ward 2.
Okay, right, okay. I want to make sure
And
of
it-
that. I want to make
yeah.
sure of that because.
I think it was represented on the early maps that we distributed, kind of showed.
Right.
It showed that best fit with the Tennessee Comptroller's web software, and showed, it was kind of hard to see though, but showed where the existing wards are and then where the block groups.
Okay.
Block groups were.
Well, if you all.
But it's good now with what Alderman Collins had that kind of
Whatever
takes
the
care of it.
result is.
Yes.
One way or the other, it'll be.
But in the redistricting committee, then that's totally, you know,
Okay.
that's totally in a whole another ward now.
All right, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank
and we can look at that later. And I appreciate the board's indulgence because somebody could have done a point of order on me and we just shut it down and I'd had to come back to you. Just a couple of comments on this. I appreciate you all are sort of our guinea pig because you all really have done, as I said before, and I'll keep my comments short because I've made most of my comments at our last meeting. You all really are the first that I know of in not only in Tennessee, but Middle Tennessee, not only in Middle Tennessee, but definitely Middle Tennessee, but Tennessee as well, is calling for a redistricting committee of citizens that we really, and I'm proud of this board because they didn't get involved like we normally do. I think Arlene or Alderman Cunningham and I've been through 3 of these, I think. It's been so many years now, but I think it's 3 that we've been through. And if I'm missing somebody else, I apologize. I just, I guess the reason why I'm so one way or the other of this, because I don't believe in politicians getting involved in redistricting. And it's an insult when I watch how Washington does these things. It's an insult, I think, to the American people. I think it's an insult to Sumner Countyans the way that the Sumner County Commission did it, the way they did these county commission seats now. I think it's an insult that they went in there and just did it. And I'm not accusing any of the commissioners. I just don't agree with the way that now they've increased the commission. I don't like increase in government. I like small government. And so with that, and then of course and now we've got the state legislature. I'm sure they're going to cut them around up there to try to benefit, the particular party that's in power. And fortunately, I mean, no disrespect, it's the Republican conservative side of the Republican Party. So I don't like the way that works. So it made me feel better when I, have listened to your committee's recommendations. I still am, and I guess I'm like, and I don't want to put words in Peg's mouth because that was a great speech. I want to let you know that. And I know I whispered it to you, but that was one of the best I've heard you do up here, and I commend you for that. And we're both concerned about the way that Ward 2 fits in this new map. But I understand, and I've had a lot of discussion with a lot of people, and I understand why you did it, though. That's the good thing. Because when I looked at it, I understood it. I go, okay, because that's where the growth was going. Ward 5 and Ward 4 really, is my opinion, and I hadn't even asked you this, and I don't want to know because I don't think I should know. Whatever you did, you did. I didn't watch you, but I believed in you because I knew that you would do the job. I researched, the mayor, had the stuff to research to who you are because I've never met most of you. I know some of you, but I've never researched it, and the ones that I knew that you would do a good job. But I think the growth of Hendersonville pushed maybe Ward 2 the way that it is formulated now, of Ward 5 and Ward 4, because that's where the growth was experiencing. That's what, every other Tuesday we were up here voting on the issues about rezoning, building, and you kind of get a feel for where the growth is going in the city of Hendersonville. So I understand that I may not agree with you, but the thing is, redistricting is such a serious issue among elected officials because it kind of defines on what they have to do in the future. So whether they agree with it or not, now when we get this thing done tonight, all of us will have to figure out what we do. Where do we go with this? Do we and this is no different from anybody else. What do we do when we campaign? Do we need to just go over there and introduce ourselves and say, hey, I'm your new alderman. I know I'm not going to be like Alderman Campbell. I'm not going to be like Alderman Peterson. But I want you to know that we're here for you because I'm going to tell you right now, everybody on this board's like that. I mean, we believe in Hendersonville. We believe in it. And regardless of whether we vote one way or the other, it doesn't offend me that they don't vote the way that I would like because we all are 13 individuals and we have 13 different opinions. And one thing I've learned is we're not going to always agree. We may vote together. It might be we get a unanimous vote up here, but I guarantee you if you went up here and asked every one of those, it would be different. There'd be a different opinion, but that opinion was focused on Hendersonville and why we wanted to do it that way. That's why I can only say this for me because I can't speak for everybody else, but, you know, it's like the apartment vote that we had maybe a month ago. I mean, some of my best friends called me and said, Skidmore, what in the blank are you doing? But I believed in that project because I knew, and I still believe in it, because I'm not a big apartment guy. I don't normally vote for one, but I did there because I believe that we're going to have something instead of people coming into our residences that are going to rent our homes that we want those single family, you know, in Ward 4 and Ward 1 and Ward 2, and because we've got to have those homes not rented, we need them bought so they can raise a family. That's what it's all about to me, is raising, going to the church. But anyway, I'm starting to rant or give you my opinion on how this, but anyway. That was my only concern, but is about Ward 2. But I do want to thank you. When I came in tonight, I wasn't sure how I was going to vote on this. I spoke to former aldermen, talked to them about it, talked to my mama about it because she's a former alderman. We had a lengthy discussion, and which I'm very appreciative of her, because she had been through probably 4 of these from the county commission, because she was a county commissioner, as well as an alderman for Hendersonville. And so I think she's been through like 4 of these. And I talked to her, and she said it's not about, you know, in her opinion, and it kind of, you know, like, yeah, that's what, it's not about who you know, where you are. It's who you're going to represent. That's what it's all about. It doesn't matter where the growth of where you are. If you're in Ward 1, and she reminded me, she goes, remember, we were in Ward 3, and then they moved us into Ward 1, and you ran in one, and you were very gracious enough to run, and the people were gracious enough to have you as an alderman in Ward 1, because they knew who you know, what you stood for. And I think that's what it's about. It's not about us. This, my opinion, it's not. It's about representing wherever you want, wherever you are. You represent those people to the best of your ability and what you believe in. And if your ideas are alike, you know, that's a good thing. But if it's not, if your ideas are not what theirs are, you can forget it in Hendersonville, because people are very knowledgeable, just like yourselves. They are. Whether they're on the Indian Lake Peninsula or Ward 1, which is the Saunders Ferry and the Walton Ferry Peninsula, because they're smart. They're really, you know, you'd be surprised if you went and knocked on somebody's door, what their view of Hendersonville is over in Indian Lake and what their view is over on, and then on my side of the peninsula. But I will say this is just my 20 to 30 years of experience as an alderman. Having 4 aldermen that represented Ward 2 and Ward 1, we are over on our side of the peninsula. My personal feeling was, or is, and still is now, is more beneficial. And I hate to say this, but it's about politics. It's about who can get to 7. That's what the deal is. Is whoever can get to 7, you're the winner. So if you have a project that's in Ward 2, you're guaranteed 2 votes on them, and you certainly know you're a fool if you don't vote for it out of Ward 1, because that, you know, those are your people. Even though they're in 2, that's still your people, really, because they think like you do. So, you know, that's 4 right there, and all we need to get is 3 more. So, you know, I struggle with that. They're not going to have that anymore. They're going to go down to 2. But that's okay, because that, and then I'll close with this, Mayor, because I'm kind of rambling here, but my point is if those 2 can't do the job in Ward 1 or with 2 votes and try to hustle and get you 5 more, you know, then he's got they have a problem. We have a problem. You know, it's between us, and we got to figure out if it passes, we got to figure out what we've got to do when we realize we're not going to get the votes. You know, it was just easier for us politically. But you all, this is what I liked about it, was you didn't look at the politics. You just did by the numbers and where the growth was and where the numbers were on your map. And that's what redistricting to me is all about. It's not about, you know, I've always tried to take politics out of paving, trying to take politics out of this. That's why I never called anybody. I never have in my years up here. Never. You do what you do. Whatever it lays out, and I'll support it. So, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman Skidmore. A couple of things I haven't had the chance. I'll come back to you on. Well, go ahead. If you want to comment on this map, go ahead.
I wanted to comment, just two procedural things that weren't said. I can speak for all of us on the redistricting committee. We all cared very, very deeply about Hendersonville. We really, really do. A. B. We took this very, very seriously. We did our homework. We made the decisions based on our knowledge and based on our love of Hendersonville. The other thing was I wanted to address growth, because growth has been hit on a couple of times here. We talked to Director Free about growth. You know, these are where kind of developments are going to go. We took that out of the equation. We had to depend on the numbers where they laid today. We weren't projecting out where growth was going to occur, because that's going to be for the next, hopefully, redistricting committee to address in 10 years. Because if something falls through, you don't want to have the math go upside down on you. So I just wanted to go, I can speak for all of us. We all care very deeply about the city of Hendersonville, and we took this very seriously. So we thank you for the opportunity to serve.
Appreciate that. I really haven't discussed this too much. Asked a couple questions of some folks, but a quick comparison of the two maps. We have the general committee map. We have the citizens map. When it comes to leveling the playing field, the citizens committee did that. The general committee map did not. When it comes to eliminating the split in Ward 2, the citizens committee almost did that, came very close. The general committee came nowhere close. When it comes to following the guidelines from the state comptroller's office, the citizens committee did that. The general committee did not. When it comes to reflecting input from residents, the citizens committee did that. General committee did not. When it comes to creating compact wards, the citizens committee did that. The general committee did not. When it comes to balancing wards, the citizens committee did a much better job of that. The citizens committee continues to have the split in Ward 2. It's split so much that one of the aldermen in Ward 2 will be almost 7 miles from the residents of that ward. And another thing that the general committee map does that's a big negative to me is it splits two subdivisions. Berry Hill subdivision, part of it will be in Ward 4, part of it will be in Ward 2, and Hidden Point subdivision, part of it will be in Ward 4, part of it will be in Ward 2. That's the case of the general committee map, not the citizen committee map. Alderman Edwards.
Thank you, Mayor. Now, I've heard the word displaced tonight, and I've gotten a lot of emails and calls and texts about who's going to be displaced and the number of people that will be displaced. But I do have a question for the mayor and or the city attorney, and I think I know the answer to it. Will every citizen get a chance to vote for an alderman of their choice in 2022, regardless of the map, whichever map, the one that's on the table, as well as the redistricting committee's map?
Yeah, either one of them, and the general committee map, regardless, and John, feel free to jump in here, we're going to have an aldermanic election in every ward in 2022, and we'll have an aldermanic election in every ward in 2024.
Okay. So in both years, every citizen of this city will be able to vote for at least one alderman, right? Or one alderman in 2022 and 2024? Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, let me say one more thing. Okay, while I've got the floor, I do want to, and this is nothing really novel, I do want to thank the redistricting committee. I know you volunteered for this position, and we appreciate that. And none of y'all had any vested interest in this at all. You weren't paid. You're presumably not going to run for alderman or mayor, and so no, you've had your taste of city politics, I'm sure. So, and I watched every minute of your meetings, and I was very impressed with how professional you were, The meetings were run in a business-like fashion, and I think all of us up here could take a lesson from watching how y'all conducted your meetings. And I was kind of skeptical at first about appointing this redistricting committee, but I voted for it. Let's give y'all a chance. Let's give the citizens a chance. And I'll tell you, I was very convinced after seeing what y'all did and having absolutely no interest at all. I was very impressed, and and y'all offered some good insight. And I think because of that, I will be supporting the map proposed by y'all because, and I think somebody mentioned this, I don't know who, but I think the optics are better when you have an independent committee who doesn't have a vested interest, as opposed to the lawmakers who always are the ones that draw their map, because I don't know why it was drawn here, but the optics are, and people presume that lawmakers draw the maps for their own benefit to try to draw them in. That's at least the optics of it. And so, if anything, we're not going to be able to come up with a ward map that pleases everybody. That's just not going to happen. I mean, we're going to please half the people and make half of them mad. Some might not agree with the process, how this came about, but because of the process, that convinces me to vote for this map. I just think it looks better. I think the optics are better. How we arrived at this result, regardless of the result, the process and the optics are better. So that's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
Alderman Edwards, thank you. Alderman Petrelli.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay. So my point of order was because we cannot have conversation between people. It's okay. I wanted to address some of the comments that were made, conflicts of interest. You said, and I get that you're not a politician, but how somebody on Saunders Ferry, why would they vote for something on the Indian Lake Peninsula? Well, because we're all adults up here and we do our homework. Mark and I both voted for the Beatty Farm. We supported that peninsula. Having grown up on the Walton Ferry Peninsula and spent 42 years living on this peninsula, I know it like the back of my hand. With the way that the wards are now, again, I'm a proponent of this general map because it is a massaging of the boundaries. It's not the same, it's a little different. My biggest concern about, and again, like I said in the first meeting, I appreciate the work that y'all did. Wards, 3 and 6, you guys are barely affected. You have a little bit, but not much. But this whole Ward 2, and, I understand planning. My degree's in architecture, was in that field for many, many decades. And when you talk about similar interests with citizens, I'm going to use the term demographics, this is a very diverse city. But since you brought it up, when you look at what you all have proposed for Ward 2, at the end here, Snug Harbor Drive, which for me, from where I live, which is at the top of the peninsula, for me to get there on a light traffic day would probably be about 25 minutes. The demographics between Anchor Drive, Harbor Drive, Gale Drive, which is in Ward 1 right now, and Snug Harbor, Bay, Hickory Heights, there's nothing similar there. With, we talk about splits in Ward 2, you all rectified the split in Ward 2. Well, it still exists. And by having those peninsulas split, as you all call it, it actually created, as Mark stated, a cohesiveness of support between the two peninsulas. This side of town was developed first. But But I am concerned for whoever is going to be representing Ward 2, and when we talk about, oh, well, my neighbor lives in a different ward, that condition exists right now. That condition will not change. Streets will be split. And so the way that this is redistricted right now with the proposal, my neighbors across the street from me will be in a different ward. That's okay. But I think, quite frankly, if somebody lived over on Bay Drive and they needed to meet with somebody on Gale, it would be more advantageous for them to jump on a jet ski and jet ski around the peninsulas together. And I'm not joking. They're going through 27 traffic lights to get to a constituent. That is the way that Ward 2 is laid out. It is very sparse, very diverse. I don't remember the word that you used, but pardon? This is not homogeneous. You know, and it does look good on paper. I will give you that. But I would be appreciative if the aldermen, you know, give consideration to that. I know that you're not. You've already stated what you're going to do, you know, but of course your wards aren't affected, right? But it is unfortunate that the boundaries were not tweaked to accommodate the redistricting instead of doing a very different plan for Ward 2. And so, and I know we've mentioned this several times now, but so right now, and I realize we haven't appointed somebody, but with this plan, there will be no sitting representative in Ward 2 unless the person that we appoint in the vacant spot happens to live within this district.
As I said about an hour ago, the person that will fill the unexpired term will have to come from the current Ward 2.
No, I understand that, but I'm saying there's still the possible dynamic that this time next year for elections, there still might not be a seated alderman in Ward 2. There is that possibility.
I don't follow you.
Okay.
Mayor, if there's no other discussion, I'd like to go ahead and call the question.
We've got nobody else in the queue. We've got nobody else in the queue. We'll go ahead and vote. We don't need to vote on calling the question. What we've got in front of us is if you support the general committee plan, that you would vote yes. If you'd like to support the other plan, the citizen committee plan, you would vote no. We're going to call the roll. So all those in favor of the general committee plan vote yes. Those who would like to vote on the citizen committee plan vote no.
Brown?
Yes.
Collins? Yes. Cunningham? Yes. Dixon? No. Edwards?
No.
Hayes?
Yes.
Peterson?
No.
Petrelli? Yes. Robertson?
No.
Skidmore? No. Waters? No. Claire?
No. That fails. One second. That fails 7-5. Alderman Robertson, we have nobody else in the queue, so we're back to the main motion, and that is approving second and final reading of ordinance 2021-48. This is a plan that was designed by the Independent Citizens Committee. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. When Annette calls your name, those opposed, please say no.
Brown? No. Collins? No. Cunningham? No. Dixon? Yes. Edwards?
Yes.
Hayes?
No.
Peterson?
Yes.
Petrelli? No. Robertson?
Yes.
Skidmore?
Yes.
Waters?
Yes.
And Claire?
Yes. That passes 7-5. Next on our agenda is second and final reading of ordinance 2021-43. This is an ordinance amending budget ordinance 2021-22 to appropriate $925,000 from stormwater to drainage control. I so move. We have a second from Alderman, I think that was Alderman Peterson. Any discussion on this? All those in favor of second and final reading of ordinance 2021-43, please signify by saying aye. Those opposed, please say no. That passes unanimously. Now we have second and final reading of ordinance 2021-49. This is an ordinance to establish a fund to track all revenues and expenditures of the coronavirus fiscal recovery funds established under the American Rescue Plan Act. I so move. We have a second from Alderman Waters. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Those opposed, please say no. That passes unanimously. Alderman Hayes. We have a motion to adjourn from Alderman Hayes, a second from Alderman Peterson. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Those opposed, please say no. That passes